So Fox News is all outraged and hot and bothered over John Kerry meeting with, wait for it, environmental groups. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So as we all know, John Kerry is tasked with the difficult job of dealing with our climate emergency. And in so doing, he's done something that has really generated a lot of outrage on the right, and that is meeting with environmentalists. Let's check it out here.
Remember the optics over his family's gas-guzzling private plane and the hypocrisy headlines that followed? Well, now a new scandal may be brewing professionally. Emails shared with Fox News Digital show his office consulted with left-wing environmental groups while crafting U.S. policy.
Oh my God. Actually talking to environmental groups. Imagine that. I mean, they might actually have some good ideas about dealing with our climate emergency, don't you think? But that's not what Republicans want. What do they want? Well, let's find out.
But the documents don't reveal any similar conversations with fossil fuel energy groups or companies. Meantime, other emails.
Aha! So that's really what they want. They want him to be meeting with fossil fuel companies, not meeting with environmental groups. After all, that's what prior administrations have done. I mean, we can all remember when George W. Bush met in private with all these fossil fuel companies without keeping any records of the meeting as is required. And yet, Fox News didn't have any problem with that, did they? But now, just imagine the fact that a Democrat might actually be talking to environmental groups. Oh my goodness. What could be worse? Let's find out.
Show a senior official in Kerry's office pushed for a phone meeting on the budget so there would be no paper trail of those discussions. Interesting. Writing.
Okay, so they wanted to have a phone meeting, maybe to discuss different ideas and throw things back and forth so that they might be able to have discussions without it all being made publicly available. Now, that's actually why we have the idea of executive privilege, that the president is able to talk about things without them becoming public so we can consider as different options without some type of pressure to release it. And my guess is that's probably what John Kerry wanted to do, is he wanted to talk about different options, throw back and forth different ideas, do a little bit of brainstorming with these organizations. But the Fox News hosts want to make this out into some big conspiracy. Let's find out more.
Quote, I would also suggest a call or meeting soon with JK to update him on FY 22 and 23 fiscal year, focusing on all the elements we can't put on paper. Cheryl, what can they put?
Okay, wait a minute. So this wasn't even John Kerry who was sending this out. This was somebody else sending this out? So they're accusing him of something that somebody else did? I wonder how that works.
On paper, saving the climate is the most important thing in the world. We should all know exactly what is going into this world-saving U.S. policy.
Well, I think what's interesting is that we're talking about non-government organizations that are listed in these emails as who they were speaking with. I mean, look.
Oh my God, non-government organizations. Imagine that. What could that be? Well, we have another word for that. That's called non-profit organizations or advocacy organizations. That's what non-government organizations are. They're just organizations that aren't other governments and aren't in businesses. So this is in contrast to, again, talking to fossil fuel companies. Now, one other point to bring up here is the fact that these are organizations that are not in it for the profit motive. They're in it for the sake of trying to improve the world. Imagine that their single goal isn't just to try to take as much money as they can, that they might actually be trying to discuss, these are good policies that might help our country. But that's something that Fox News is really scared of, isn't it?
How about talking to the other side? Talk to the energy industry. You villainize them so much. Why don't you ask them what they want to do and how they can fix climate? Maybe they can.
Okay, let's start with this. Villainizing? This is just after they talked about how horrible these non-governmental, radical, environmental, left-wing organizations are. And at the same time, I never heard any call from them to talk to the environmental groups, talk to the other side, when the Republican administrations were basically appointing lobbyists from the fossil fuel companies to oversee our natural resources.
reduce emissions because look, they're making big efforts to do so. I mean, look, electric vehicles, hate them or not, people are buying them. So
Okay, let's have a reality check here also. Electric vehicles, where they're talking about, oh, these fossil fuel companies are trying to promote them. No, the fossil fuel companies are fighting against them. The fossil fuel companies fought against what was in the Inflation Reduction Act, basically the incentives that are aimed at trying to encourage people to buy electric cars. So we're going to look to the oil companies to try to help us out of this. I think that they've had the chance so far. Let's see what else they say.
Capitalism work here. Instead, you're going to these non-government organizations in secret. It just looks bad.
So what does that tell you about John Kerry in his office? I mean, doesn't it seem like he doesn't really know what he's doing and he wants to be liked by the Sierra Club instead of...
Okay, the Sierra Club. Oh my God, here we are. That radical environmental left-wing organization. Just a reminder, though, that a lot of members of the Sierra Club are hunters. You know, they're a really radical left-wing organization, aren't they? And their goal is to protect the environment so that we still have an environment going forward. Boy, that's a radical goal. And what's more is that they're not in it for the money. They're not in it to try to generate revenues like the oil companies are. No, they're in it to try to protect the environment. It's such an outrage that they would have this secret agenda. Finally, what's worth pointing out is the fact that these organizations don't have the big PACs and high-priced lobbyists and the active political operations aimed at influencing policy the way that these oil companies do. So I think it's actually good that he's meeting with these organizations, but that's really what Fox News is afraid of. Let's see what else they say.
Really trying to inform himself, and to Cheryl's point, it come to some consensus with both sides if this is so.
Now, here's the point. Again, they say that they say on the one hand that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Then they say that he should try to inform himself by talking to both sides. And yet, the fact is he has to reach out to the environmental organizations. I can guarantee you that John Kerry has been contacted by lobbyists from the oil companies. It's not like they're not talking to him. It's just that, again, the environmentalists don't have the resources available to them to affect policy the way the big oil companies do.
Critically important?
If it was such an emergency and we've been told 8 years, 12 years, 6 months, Greta Thunberg, everything, they would have done everything possible to stop it. But John Kerry and Steven Spielberg, who, by the way, in 1 month uses more of a carbon...
I find it interesting that of all people, they point to Steven Spielberg. Gee, I wonder what it is about him that they would be interested in pointing to him for.
footprint than the average person does in a year. They just don't care. This is a grift.
This is a grift. Okay, number one, let me just remind them. John Kerry is married to Teresa Heinz. She's the heiress to the Heinz fortune, you know, as in like Heinz ketchup. Money's not a problem. He doesn't need to get any more money, and he's certainly not out to get that. And frankly, if he were just interested in enjoying his life, he wouldn't have to be spending the time banging his head against the wall trying to save the environment. But they have to try to paint this as something sinister because of the fact that this is such a threat to the oil companies that are basically financing Fox News.
This is an all-out grift. Al Gore proved you could literally take hundreds of millions of dollars, put it into a fund, build a mega mansion, and go on with the grift. And John...
I don't even know where he's going with that. You know, the thing that's amazing about Al Gore that people forget is that after he was defeated for president, he basically started to go around the country speaking. Now, remember what most former presidents and former vice presidents do. I mean, for that matter, Hillary Clinton did it, is that they go to Wall Street and charge people for all kinds of money so that they're able to give speeches and enrich themselves. It's what Bill Clinton did, it's what George H.W. Bush did, it's what George W. Bush did. But instead, what did Al Gore do? Well, Al Gore, and by way of full disclosure, when he first ran for president, I was supporting one of his opponents in 1988. So it's not like I'm some Al Gore flunky here. But Al Gore, after he was defeated for president, he decided that this was an issue. Climate change was an issue important enough that he was going to devote his life to it. And he basically traveled the country showing this slideshow describing how critical it was we start to address this issue. And you should know, when he was in Congress, he always had made the environment a priority of his. In fact, when George H.W. Bush was running against Bill Clinton and Al Gore, They made a big deal out of Al Gore's environmental bona fides. So Al Gore just went around the country giving this slideshow, trying to convince people of the importance of this issue. It was only later on, as people started to become aware of it, and then they made a movie of it, that it became kind of the celebrity thing that it was. But at first, this was just Al Gore going and speaking in front of anybody who would listen to try to describe to them the importance of addressing the climate emergency.
John Kerry just wants his.
Yeah.
You got to make sure the yacht's up to speed, the crew's in place, the plane is ready to go. You don't want to have any problems. Maybe the caviar if you need it. And they jet around the world, virtue signaling. Actually, they're lying to the people they actually claim they care about. Because for every one of you out there that believes in climate change, guess what?
Okay, I love this. Believes in climate change, is that if this were so important, it's a grift, it doesn't exist, all this stuff. Let's just start with something. Climate change is a reality. Climate change is argued, oh, it's just a theory. Well, you know what else is a theory? Gravity. And yet I'm not flying up into the air just because of the fact that there are some flat earthers who claim that it doesn't exist. That's essentially what we're talking about with the people who are denying that climate change is a problem.
What have you gotten?
So, Kat, they also have these emails that went back and forth with senior officials saying, let's keep this off paper.
Yes.
And when they were discussing the budget. So I want to know, are they like bathing in gasoline secretly?
No, this is objectively shady to write to someone, let's talk on the phone about.
Okay, objectively shady. Again, all the meetings that were held in the Trump administration that we didn't get access to. And the difference is, again, there's no financial issue here. There's no financial commitment here. It's a big difference when you have Dick Cheney, who is then the vice president, chairing a meeting of oil executives when he himself is a former oil executive, and the oil companies had sunk a ton of money into George W. Bush's campaign to help get him elected. That's shady. The fact that John Kerry and his staff want to talk with environmental groups and talk about different options in dealing with climate change, there's nothing shady about that at all.
All that stuff that we want no record of. Yeah. It is. And anybody who would say that it's not, I would ask them, what would you do if you found a text message like that on your spouse's phone? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what would you do if you had a president of the United States who refused to release his tax returns? Gee, that's shady, isn't it? Yet I don't hear Fox News saying anything about that.
What would you do if anybody was saying, hey, okay, yeah, let's talk on the phone because we don't want this in writing? The only reason to say that is because you don't want anyone to be able to see it. So what were you referring to there? Give me an example. I can't imagine thinking anything else but that.
By the way, thank you. People all over America now are checking their phones.
That's writing off paper.
I mean,
but that's not how government is supposed to operate.
No, they're all.
They're right. That's not how government is supposed to operate. There's supposed to be transparency, like with the president releasing his tax returns, or like with the White House visitor logs being released. And we all know about those things, don't we?
All kinds of federal records acts because your texts are discoverable on a government device, your email. So if you want to have a conversation about something.
Wait, texts are discoverable by the government? Wasn't there something I heard about the Secret Service under Trump and their texts?
Candidly, you pick up the phone and call. You don't write in an email like, let's pick up the phone to keep this off the record.
Actually, I can tell you, there are a lot of circumstances where they would write an email saying, hey, let's schedule a call. Reason being, John Kerry's a busy guy. He's traveling all over the world dealing with this issue. And so the fact that they need to actually schedule a meeting so that they can kind of talk about different ideas is something that really shouldn't be surprising at all.
That was like a very
you could even just say, let's talk on the phone instead of to keep it out of the record.
Right. Then it's on the record that you want to talk on the phone. I mean, I don't understand this person. I'm sure the recipient of that email was like, okay, what are you doing, buddy? But I will say, look, talking to special interest groups, that happens all the time. In the Trump government, sure, you're going to talk to special interest groups.
Oh, imagine that. The Trump administration talked to special interest groups. Now, here's the question. Did they talk with the other side? Did they talk to environmentalists? I think not.
Same for the Biden government. This is a left-wing government. They're going to talk to left-wing special interest groups. But to me, it's the degree at which it happens at the CDC with the teachers' unions dictating CDC guidelines, literally suggesting language that is verbatim adopted as if it's like scientific policy by the CDC. That's where the problem comes.
I'm calling BS here. That never happened. So did the CDC consult with any number of interested groups about what its options are, just like other governmental organizations do? Absolutely. But did the teachers union write guidelines for the CDC verbatim? I think not.
And I'd love to know the degree to which these interest groups crafted policy before the G7. Was it verbatim language? I'd love to know the answer to that.
Yeah, and how much money they have donated to particular causes and campaigns.
That's the $64,000 question. The answer to that is virtually nothing. Maybe a little bit here or there, but it's minuscule compared to the amount of money that is donated by the oil companies. And that's what this is really all about, protecting the oil companies.
And, you know, because when that happens, and to your point about the teachers unions, they donate to Democrats. So when Democrats are in power, they want access to that power to help write laws that are directly beneficial to them. So why wouldn't the Sierra Club do the exact same thing? You know, and we're seeing billions of dollars go into this, you know, Inflation Reduction Act, which is really a climate bill. So obviously, those special interest groups, they're going to see the billions.
Yep, no doubt about it.
Am I wrong about that, Kat?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it happens every day.
Thank you. I love you and Nate.
You know, this is much ado about nothing from what I can tell. They're trying to create a mountain out of a molehill, and I don't even know if it's a molehill. I mean, basically you're talking about John Kerry talking with different interest groups who, by the way, are not profit-making entities. They're not making money off of this. They have policy goals that they're advocating for, and the policy goals that they're advocating for are protecting the environment, something that John Kerry is in favor of, something that President Biden is in favor of. So you would imagine that they'd be talking with these groups about their options and considering different strategies and approaches that they might be taking. And you can imagine that they'd not want these things necessarily to be all recorded until they've finalized what they're going to present. But this is in no way any example of somebody trying to make money off things. I mean, John Kerry, again, with the Heinz millions behind him, he doesn't have to worry about money. This is simply an effort by Fox News to try to stand up and protect the oil companies, who are hurting pretty bad right about now after the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. Well, if you want to see another video about who's really pulling the strings with Fox News, check out this one that I did over here, where I talk about the fact that you've got the oil companies and Vladimir Putin pulling the strings. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.